Okay. So we are back to this Torah portion in the middle of the book of Leviticus. It starts with, it's called Achere Mos. It began with the service of Yom Kippur in the temple. And then we start moving into some more laws of the Torah. And the first one we spoke about was the forbidden blood, that we don't consume blood of even of a person, but really here is talking about animal blood, and we've spoken about that at length. And one of the things that the Torah's expression is that the blood, not for us to consume, the blood of an animal. We can eat the flesh of an animal in certain circumstances of certain animals, and properly prepared, and not to be gluttonous about it, but it's the idea of eating the flesh of an animal for the human, the productivity, for us to be able to have strength and vitality to do God's work in the world, which is what life is about. It's permissible to eat meat, and then it says that the blood is really a use of the blood is to be put it on the altar to atone for our souls. This goes back to the whole idea of offerings, which this book has spoken quite a bit about. And the offerings were the idea of sometimes bringing from the vegetative world, but often from the animal world as an offering to God. Sometimes the flesh would be eaten by the Kohen or by the donor. Sometimes it was totally consumed on an altar. The idea was of being able to also offer our own animal, so to speak, our own. It was the whole idea of an offering was coming close. The Hebrew word for an offering is korban, which has its grammatical structure, its linguistic structure, the word of coming close, being close, and therefore it was a coming close mechanism. And there was a lot of thought process that went into it. Yolanda, you asking a question?
Yes. Thing is, I know that when we do blood transfusion, we don't consume it, but are we allowed to have blood transfusions?
Great question. We can have blood transfusions. And in general, as actually what we may study today, because it's coming up pretty close in this Torah portion, there's the idea of mitzvahs in general are there for us to live with. So just about any prohibition, except for 3, is set aside for the saving of a life, or whatever that really means for any significant health need. Someone in need of a transfusion, I don't think you do it for anything but something we would consider significant, and there's nothing wrong with it anyway. You're not consuming it, not eating it, because the eating of it is it's like devouring the entire animal, so to speak, not only the flesh but their soul. The idea that someone whose blood is impaired medically and physiologically and biologically, as now, so their soul, because the soul, blood is called the soul of the human and called the soul of the animal in Scripture, and there's a reason for that, because without our blood, nothing works. The blood is the juice of life biologically for us. So for us to be able to use some of another person's biological soul to be able to amplify our own biological soul is totally fine, and it would be considered a very a good thing for us to donate blood, to be able to help that out. That's not considered eating at all, but that's a great question. The sensitivity is to eating it, and to the extent actually that even the human blood, that's not talking about here. They're talking about animal blood, but human blood is also, at least rabbinically, prohibited. And one of the things that it's the advice of Jewish law is what happens if I cut my finger. If I cut my finger, so I go get a Band-Aid, but I might, just when I'm trying to stop the blood or get rid of it, if I don't have a tissue especially, I might actually lick it. So the advice of Jewish law is that before we even lick our own wound, is to wipe off the first layer of it, so that it's clear, even if no one's around, that it's coming from the person, that it's not animal blood that fell on my finger, and therefore then I can suck it because it's not biblically prohibited.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for asking. Okay, so now we're talking about the altar. And the altar, the idea of when it came to the offerings and the bringing of the offering, the animals and offering, a central piece of that was that some of the blood would be put onto the altar. The altar represents God, represents God's station, so to speak, and we are giving of that blood. And the blood also represents the passion, but it's the passion of the animal, of our passion, because when we're passionate, our blood boils, our blood pumps up, our blood pressure goes up. So we're giving of that to God. So now let's take a look at the Hasidic insights. Upon the altar to atone for your souls. As we have seen previously, blood, so it's the Hasidic insights at the bottom for 11. Blood being warm signifies enthusiasm. Okay, right? We get enthusiastic, we get pumping. The fact we are forbidden to consume blood, but are required to sprinkle it on the altar, means that we must be enthusiastic, not about our material needs, but about a divine mission. So this is a very important Torah teaching, Hasidic teaching, guidance, or food for introspection. Question is, where do our passions lie? So one can live by the book, doing everything right and not doing anything wrong. And that's great. And that's, in some ways, that's all God can ask of us. But then there's the question is, how do we operate? What's going on inside? So what if a person says to me that they think about murdering someone all the time and they get excited about it, but they never touched anybody? So on the one hand, that's great. They didn't do anything. They're fine. But I would very strongly suggest that they speak with a therapist, a psychologist, or psychiatrist, because why are you getting pleasure out of the idea of killing somebody? There's something wrong. More understandable, but morally a problem. What if someone says, I'm obsessed with someone else's spouse? And I think about them all the time. I never touched anyone. I didn't even text them, but I think about them all the time. That's a problem. It's not a technical problem because you didn't do anything, but where's your head? Where are your passions? And if your passions are in a place that's not morally healthy or legally healthy, it's something to think about our own inner dynamics. So even though on a legal end we can only talk about, you can't prosecute someone for thinking about murder, or for obsessing about or dreaming about someone else's spouse. But if they're talking about their own inner posture and where they stand and their own inner self-discipline and their own purity, of course that's something to be discussed. And the question is to see, like, where is that coming from and how can I redirect my passions in a healthy place? And Chabad thought puts a lot of emphasis, a lot of focus on that. Of course, what we do is a starting point. Do no harm and do the right things. But the idea of what we do, doing all the right things, it's an external. It's great, but it's an external idea, and it's not easy to do that. The idea is, but then it's where are we inside? If I walk around resenting or being jealous of someone all day, but I just didn't do anything, so yeah, I can't be held liable for anything except that I just wasted my energy, and my heart and my head are in the wrong place. My soul is being put into the wrong place, because why would I devote it to resentment, jealousy, anger, and negative feelings? So it's something for me to think about. Again, not because I violated anything concrete, but not everything in life is concrete. Especially we have a whole spiritual world and a psycho-spiritual posture that we want to think about. So here one of the things is, where do I put my passions? So let's get away from dreaming about killing someone or doing something immoral with someone. Just all I do is I think about food. That's what gets me passionate. A lot of people are like it. People tell me that. So you're not hurting anybody. You're not doing anything immoral. There's nothing criminal there, but you're passionate about food. So if a person is open to thinking about, okay, now every day is precious, and I want to be able to direct my whole self in the right direction, not just what I do, but how I think and how I feel, then just thinking about lunch or dinner, excessively, thinking about it excessively, it's a waste of my energy. And the question is, well, why does that animate me so much? There are only a few things. You can't have that many passions. And where the passions go, a lie, that really tells you it's what gets your blood pumping. It's where you live. I mean, conceptually, it's what really rings your bell. And in life, I think we'd all hope that when we're in a quiet moment and we're thinking about ourselves, that our objective for a day, our passion for the day, where we're really invested for the day, is not just about a good meal, which is great. There's nothing criminal about a good meal. It's good. It's wonderful, and hopefully it's healthy too. But shouldn't there be something more important? Our relationships, our whether with loved ones or those around us, making a difference in the world. So if my passion is that I want to make my day meaningful, and part of that is to have a meal, and I want to make sure it's a good meal, that's fine. Everything fits into place. But what's my passion? And if my passion is about having a meaningful day, and getting to that is going to take me perhaps postponing my meal a little bit, or maybe even altering it because for some reason, in some scenario, one value bumps up against another. If my passion is about doing something meaningful, so that trumps the other. That will take precedent, because it's what my primary objective is, my primary passion. So the question of where do our passions lie is a very, very important moral question in Jewish thinking. I'm going to say here in Hasidic thinking. So one of the ideas is that, and I'm going to say it here, the Torah refers to that us working, and that it's good to be productive, it's good to be constructive, and that's considered, having a job, being productive and feeling useful in the world is an important thing for the human persona, and therefore there's, when you eat from the toil of your hands, the Torah says, praised are you, all be well with you. What does it mean? It's that, first of all, you're not living off someone else. Living off someone else, that's a side issue here, but since I mentioned the verse, living off someone else doesn't make us feel good. We don't feel good about ourselves. So we want to earn our own money. And if we're earning our own money and our own sustenance, that's good, because we're constructive, we're being productive, we're being useful, we're earning our own money, we're standing on our own 2 feet. It gives a very good bedrock psychologically for us. But the language of the scripture there is the work of your hands. And what the Hasidic thought derives from that language is that it's the work of your hands, not the work of your head. Now, what does that mean? Very often, even if you work with your hands, you have to invest your head in it, your intellect, your logic. It's not, some of us can make a living just stocking shelves in ShopRite, and maybe we don't have to put that much into it, although probably every job takes some thought in being a toll taker. Something on the turnpike, you have to have something. But for most of us, we have to put our heads into it, and we have to think, and we have to analyze, and that's okay. I'm a lawyer, a teacher, a doctor, a real estate broker. I have to put myself into it, because in order for me to succeed, you got to engage. So it's not saying just use your hands and not your head, because most of your most occupations where you're going to be able to earn enough to be able to make a living, you have to use your hands. Your action is just the tip of the iceberg. You have to invest in yourself. But what the nuance that Hasidic thought is finding in this is that even don't invest your passions. So in other words, when the job is over, try to be able to leave it behind. You'll get to it tomorrow morning. And hopefully your real passions are waiting to be able to come out and exercised and pursued once the day is over. It's 4:30, it's 6 o'clock, whatever the day is over, whenever the job is over. Because it's about where I really live. So for many people, my job is this, but I live my job. I'm never really away from it. But then at times I want to be able to say, okay, but now my job is usually about others. Then I come home, I have to make my objective, my primary thrust of my life and my passion, my kids, my family. The demarcation lines are important, and understanding priorities is important. But let's take it away from here, because that confuses a little bit. If I am an attorney, and I've thrown myself in today into helping my clients today to do a good job for them, that's totally in sync with this verse. But for me to understand that ultimately my life is about being leading a meaningful life and about bringing meaning to the world. So where I can do that and help with my clients, fine. Where now what we're doing is just paperwork, our rebuttals to some nasty brief that was sent by the other side. I have to deal with it. I have to deal with it well. But inside, that's not where I want to live. I have to do it, and I have to do it well. But then once I'm done with it, I have to go back to where my real passions are, and my pure North Star is, and not get swept up with that. I could theoretically, if I'm an attorney, I could live with the resentment towards the other side and on the nastiness of a brief, and sleeping at night also, because I want to be able to write it in a way that really pokes the most holes. It's really, the question is, where do we want to live? Where do we want to work, and where do we want to live? And here the language of using your hands means that it's a relatively extraneous part of the personality, not the deepest part of our personality. So here, what it says here, so the blood, we say, we don't want to be enthusiastic about our material needs, but not our divine, not about our material needs, but about our divine mission. We want to be enthusiastic about living a life in God's world, doing God's work as a lawyer, or an accountant, or whoever it is. In the words of the Psalm.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
This is really significant to me, because this is one of the biggest challenges for me. And how do you, but like, I'm a realtor, and it's very hard to not become emotionally involved in every transaction. I'm actually working on one that is very challenging and just a hard one for me personally. Any tips? I know, focus on family priority. I was thinking about that, instead of all this angst and everything, I should be focusing on my mother, my family, but it's not so easy to do. I was just interested in hearing your insight in how do we make those priorities more important and not become so emotionally involved and attached and upset at times, or I don't know.
No, I live there too, Lori. It's not easy, and I have definitely not easy. And I know it's not easy, not only for me and you, but I know if Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad, wrote about this struggle for focus and for keeping priorities straight. He wrote it, more than 200 years ago for a bunch of Hasidim living in the shtetl. So if it was difficult then, I can only imagine it's a lot more difficult now when we have our iPhones, and we have, there's really, it's very much harder to find sacred space and detachment. For me, prayer is a very important part of it, because that's when I want to shut down the world. I want to really think about what's important, and then look at some of the things that really do take up space in my life because they're important. I'm not worrying all day about a hangnail, and I'm not. It's what's invading my brain is not something I read in a comic book, but it's real stuff. But then you want to look and say, in the scope of my life, what's really important to me, and am I giving that its proper due? And not only that, but often is the engagement that I'm going through in a specific thing, hopefully that's also in the service of what's really important in my life, because succeeding at that helps you support or feed your larger objectives. So framing it, I'm sure realty has plenty of very complex challenges, but you're in it for a purpose. Well, what's your purpose? Your purpose is, I assume, first of all, you're helping people. I know you've helped people in my family, so you can feel good that you managed to get families settled in homes that are suitable for them. You had a piece of the puzzle there, where their pleasurable family life is because you contributed to it, which you did, and I think that's it's an honest way to think about it, and a constructive way to think about it. But then also you're earning money for your family, all right? You're not only doing it as a public service, you're doing it as a job, and the reason you're earning money is that I'm quite confident. Those are noble objectives. It's about your family. It's about your own security. It's you say your mother. I'm sure you're there for her, to be able to be there for her. And the more successful you are in these deals, the more you're able to be there for her. So a lot of it is internal framing, but the first thing is to be able to shut out the world and be able to look at it from more of an aerial view, because we get so sucked into our stresses that they start to take us over, and we start to identify with them, and it's very hard to see beyond them. So the detaching is and then reevaluating and viewing what we're going through, but more from what I'll call an aerial view, I find very, very helpful, because I'll get sucked into it. So I identify with the struggle. I don't know if what I just said resonates with you at all, but asking me about me, I know that it's part of my life, but I know that daily, if I'm working to put my stresses where they belong and keep my eye on my North Star, then that also is God's work. God gave me an obstacle course called life. So, if I manage to maneuver my way around, at least partially, around a certain obstacle, then I've been living my best life.
No, thank you. That definitely, getting back to the point, prayer, it definitely helps me tremendously. And I feel like if I just pray and ask for God's help, like I might be making a little, like I might not be able to do it, like relieve that stress. But after, I get into a psalm or whatever, and I feel like, I feel better. I feel like the world is calmer, and I get many times I get so emotionally invested in every transaction. So I know that not every agent does, but when I do pray, it does help. So thank you for reminding me of that. I really appreciate it.
of course, and then that's what you just said is exactly, and I wish I'd said that also. There's something we feel more empowered and we're better able to deal with our stresses when we stand outside them a little bit. An objective person coming into a situation is often able to see things more clearly than a person who's in the trenches. And sometimes we want to try and see if we can be that objective person, but by getting out of the stranglehold it has on us, to stand back a little bit and see it for what it is, and see it in the scope of a larger picture of our lives, and then be able to deal with it. Someone called yesterday. Someone here called me. There was an emergency because something on a deadline, and there was something a hold up, and there was a lot of stress here. I said, "Can you write and explain that you really this is we know that this is an important deadline and it's important to you, but because this associate here didn't show up today, it's going to be very difficult. You don't think you'll be able to get it done today? Get it done tomorrow morning." And the person said, "That's a great idea." It's not a great idea. That's a normal idea. But the thing is, I wasn't in the trenches. And for someone else, it's when you're in the midst of the stress, it's harder to see things clearly.
Very true. Very
Yeah.
true. Thank you again. Your insight is just so amazing. I just want.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to leave in 5 minutes because I'm actually driving to take my mom to an appointment. I'm picking her up. I have to get off early. I find so much strength from all of your, classes and everything. Thank you again.
Thank you. And good luck with your mom.
Thank you.
I'm going to mine after this. Okay. So here the language is meaning that we will succeed in life only if we immerse just our hands, again, which may include our practical intellect, but it means, in other words, it means more the external layers of our personality. It doesn't mean you don't use your head in our work, but not our heads and hearts. When overenthusiasm for the materiality of life leads us to transgress God's will, part of the atonement process is applying the blood of the required sin offering to the altar. So here, a second. Okay. What it's saying is that when we put it to the altar, when we bring an offering and we take the blood of the offering and put it on the altar, what we're doing is we're applying our enthusiasm. Part of it, what's to atone, the language is to atone for what? To atone for our animal enthusiasm, where we're over enthusiastic, over engaged in our material side of life and not in our higher thinking, and therefore we bring that to put that on the altar, and the language is to atone for us, to atone for our souls. Now, as we have seen, and we will see further, there are two types of sin offerings. Those whose blood is applied to the inner altar, the sin offerings of the high priest of the Sanhedrin of Yom Kippur. So there were two altars. One was in the inner sanctum, and one was in the outer courtyard. So putting blood on the inner altar is for more inner things. And that, because, well, first, that's the high priest of Sanhedrin and Yom Kippur, and those whose blood is applied to the outer altar, all others. The remainder of the blood of all sacrifices is poured onto the base of the outer altar. All of it goes into the outer altar, but where it is distinguished. The blood of the inner sin offerings is poured onto the west side of the base, and that other offerings is poured onto the south side. Okay, so again, that's just internal bookkeeping. What is the significance in that? Allegorically, inner sin offerings correspond to inner sins, improper thoughts which are known only to God. Like we were talking about before, right? As an example, a person is thinking about they obsess about hurting someone or doing something immoral. The leftover blood of these offerings is therefore poured onto the western side of the altar, the side facing the sanctuary, which is denoted by the Torah as being before God. So this is something that I don't want to get too much into it now, but if we can, I think it's an important thing, just to clarify for ourselves. The western side is before God. What does that mean? When we walked into the temple, and walked on the east into the east side of the temple, And the more they progressed inside, which means into holier sanctums, they were going further west. The Holy of Holies was on the west side, so they would have progressed further west. So that was a focal point of it was, in a way, the focal point of the service in the temple. Now, where I feel that can be confusing to your average modern day Jew is that we're used to facing east. And east is, first of all, when we pray, we face east. Some of that is because we're facing the sun, which is to the east of us. But there is a prominence to east in Judaism, aside from how we pray. At the assumption is east when we say the idea of south and is synonymous with to the right. Why is to the right? Because you're facing east. South is to the right, and north is associated with the left, and west is considered with the back. It's in the Torah literature. That's really it's very much how it's framed. So as we grow up and we say, we pray to the east, the Torah is in the east, and we have this idea where there's a focal point of the east. So then all of a sudden we say, no, it says the west is where the action is, the spiritual action is. And actually what I did was I just because I saw this what we're doing, I just wanted to clarify this because it might be in your minds when this comes up. I'm going to share a screen for a piece of Talmud here, and we'll talk about it a little bit. So in this piece of Talmud, this is a tractate in the Talmud, which talks about, it's about commercial law. And the first few chapters of this Talmud are a lot about land use issues, neighbors, property lines. And one is about this specific one, which really doesn't have any direct relevance to our conversation, but I just want to give you some context. This is about using property for purposes which might impact others, like a tannery, which smells. So the questions of downwind, upwind, they're because I can't just say it's my property, therefore you can't tell me what to do. If it's going to impact my neighbor because it has such a strong smell, then my neighbor does have a say in it. So one of the things it says is that if there's about the winds, and in the Mishnah, I don't want to get too much into this piece of Talmud, but in the Mishnah there, in the piece of Talmud, it talks about the idea of frequent. Well, actually, maybe I should just bring it up so I'm not speaking cryptically. It's talking about different winds from different directions, and so again, this is meteorological, not for our conversation. But it talks about that the western wind, it says, is frequent. So now the Talmud says, what is the meaning of frequent? So it says, actually, when the rabbi, who previously his name was Rabbi Akiva, when he mentions that this is a frequent wind, it doesn't mean that frequent in that we would say that the wind blows often. He was making a more spiritual comment, a religious comment. It means frequent with the divine presence, meaning that the divine presence is found on the western side. That the western side, to the west, that's where we find, again, in the temple, that's where the Holy of Holies was, and we want to be careful with respecting the western side. Therefore, it's inappropriate to set up a tannery there with its foul odors, which is in others belong to the west. So now he made a comment that the western side is where there's the divine presence. So now, oops, 1 second. Sorry. So, therefore, Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, "Come, let us be grateful to our ancestors who revealed to us the place of prayer, as it is written, and the hosts of heaven bow down to you." Our ancestors showed us the place of prayer. What's the place of prayer? I mean, it means the direction of prayer. God is everywhere, but there's a direction. Because in the book of Nehemiah, it says the hosts of heaven bow down to you. What does that mean? Hosts of heaven means the celestial bodies. Celestial bodies move from east to west. Since the celestial bodies move from east to west, they bow in that direction. It's like we're looking at the sun or whatever, the clouds, everything going into the sphere going from east to west. It's like they're bowing towards the west. They bow in that direction, which indicates that the divine presence is in the west. So what the Talmud says here, that conceptually you can say that the world shows us that there is the intensity of the divine presence is in the west. That's why the sun and everything with it, when the day starts, they're bowing towards the west, towards God. Second. Rabbi Yaakov objects to this. Perhaps the celestial bodies are like a servant who receives the gifts from his master and walks backward while bowing. Maybe it's in the east. And now the sun is like backing off from the divine presence and ending up in the west, which is further. If so, the divine presence is in the east, and so the celestial bodies are moving backward. Okay. Now, okay, so we'll stop right there. Okay, so there is this idea, and the Talmud goes further. God is everywhere, but there is a little bit of a seeming a lack of clarity as to where is there a specific focal point for God. Again, in our world, we pray to the east, but the Talmud says that the divine presence is in the west. It's referring to the Holy of Holies, and clearly there's something with the west. So there's actually two different ways to be able to look at this. When we look to the east and we look to the sun rising, we look at the origins of our day. The sun is we think about a new day. It's God gave us a new day. There's birth, and that is the beauty of creation. And the sun rising is like new life. We're looking at the origins, at Genesis. At the same time, the east is the past. We're going to read a Torah, a Torah, or we in Hebrew, there's a word. One of the words for east is kedem, kedma. That's used in the Torah portion. We're going to read this now, Simchas Torah, this weekend. We use that word. That it's the God. It's God's. Talk about God's sanctuary from times of old, because kedem means from before. So in a way, east is the past, and west is the future. We're looking to the future. So there's a difference between looking at the power and the beauty, the spiritual beauty of origins, and there's a difference, and it's a different spiritual beauty when we're talking about where we're going, talking about our future. In Torah life, we see a lot, even when our ancestors are traveling, they're going from east to west. Because east is a point of our origination, which is powerful in its sense, but then where they're going is the future. In civilizations, in our past millennia, certainly Jewish civilizations, have moved from east to west. So the sun setting is what it really is. It's not that here's only it's the power, the beauty of the sun and the setting, and we pray to the east. It's about the power of our origin, but there is a lot to be said about the power of not only what was, but of what will be. So, without getting into the details of what fits where, there's actually those two poles are both very significant. Obviously, everything in the world is significant. Those two poles are very significant in Jewish life, but east and west. One is the point of origin, and one is the point of potential. And in the temple, the point walking into the temple was about starting at a point of origin on the east and progressing towards our own self-actualization in the west. So here, on the western side of the altar, which was the side facing the sanctuary, then the blood would be poured out there. Why? Because it was the inner sins, the inner problems we had. And that was something more intimate about our relationship with God. No one knew anything. I didn't do anything. And so it's not about the more external layer of my being. It's about between me and God. And therefore, we poured out on the western side. In contrast, outer sin offerings correspond to outer sins, meaning improper speech and deeds. The leftover blood of these offerings is poured onto the south side of the altar. For the southern direction is associated in the northern hemisphere with warmer temperatures, and Israel is in the northern hemisphere, and it is the heat of enthusiasm for materiality which leads to most sins, as mentioned above. So we want to take, quote unquote, the heat, our passion, and put that on the altar. Now, although it is forbidden to consume blood, it is permitted to derive other forms of benefit from it, such as using it for fertilizer and the like. So if I slaughtered chickens outside of my lawn today because I'm making dinner, that's totally fine. I can't eat the blood, so I'll pour it out, and then I'm going to soak the meat. Now, pouring it out, what happens if I say, I'm not going to eat it, but blood can be used as a fertilizer. I'm going to pour it on my garden. It's totally fine. Not an issue. The Torah will indeed later state that the blood of slaughtered animals must be spilled on the ground like water. The Torah actually says explicitly not to use it for fertilizer. It goes on the ground. If it goes on the ground, conceivably that could be a ground that grows things. Allegorically, this means that although we must aspire to complete indifference toward materiality, if we nonetheless become enthusiastic about some aspect of it, we may make use of the byproduct of our enthusiasm. So here, this is a little bit more of a nuance. If I'm really excited about something in material, something going on, I bought a new house, I have a new car. Yes, I have to watch myself and say, why is this taking up so much space? But if I can channel that into something productive, let's say I got a new car, I'm really excited about it. So I take my kids. I say, let's go in the new car. We're going to go for a ride. I want to have a conversation with you, or we're going to go spend quality time, because I can see it in myself that it enthuses me. It puts me in a good place. So until it's not new anymore. But meanwhile, I want to be able to channel it in a constructive place. So although we must aspire to complete indifference toward materiality, ideally it would be, so I got a car, because it's just a car. But if that's not the way I'm feeling, if we nonetheless become enthusiastic about it, some aspect of it, we make use of the byproduct of our enthusiasm. This escape clause, however, only applies on condition that we spill it on the ground. But there we say, bear in mind that is nothing more than fertilizer, a foul-smelling, repulsive agent for further spiritual growth, possessing no intrinsic value, never belong on the ground, meaning not artificially elevated to any level of esteem. So I got a new car. I'm excited about it. So part of it is I'm excited about it. I want to go be seen by it. It's flashy. I want to go, stand by it in the parking lot and shop rides. People think I'm cool or whatever it is. The younger you are, the more likely this makes any sense. But it could be. I mean, it's a Mercedes. I want to make sure my neighbors see it. So that's not healthy. But if I'm excited about it, so now that I'm using it, I've channeled it in a constructive way. Just got to make sure that I don't delude myself into thinking that it's okay for me to be excited about a Mercedes. It's not. But since I'm going to channel it into something. Again, take my kids somewhere or going with someone special, just to be able to get something productive out of it. But in my head, I should realize that this blood, this passion for it, that belongs on the ground. It's not ultimately Mercedes just a hunk of metal, expensive hunk of metal. Furthermore, this blood must become like water, the cold, transparent, tasteless symbol of self-abnegation. So Torah says, pour it like water. So there's meaning to that. So take the blood, which is the symbol of the passion, and pour it on the ground so it becomes like water. Water, no one gets excited about water, unless you're really hungry, thirsty. It's not something with that kind of character. So saying like water means it becomes duller. It becomes less flashy to you. In this way, the erstwhile forbidden blood can be transformed into foodstuffs that are fit for consumption, permitted for consumption. If I'm putting on my garden and then I'm growing carrots, so ultimately it's helping me. It does have a constructive way through. The first I have to be transformed, meaning that the byproducts of our misplaced enthusiasm can indirectly become transformed into forces for goodness and even divinity. So that is a lesson about the blood. Now,
this was really interesting, by the way. I am very intrigued by this whole notion of divinity in the West.
yeah.
And I understand why we have to face east, because it's west within east. In other words, if we faced west, we'd be facing away from the temple writ large.
Right.
So it's west within east. If that makes any
yeah.
sense.
That makes sense. That's an interesting way of putting it. And that I think that does make sense, and it is on point. And it's really it is a much larger conversation, a very interesting conversation, a much larger conversation. But it's that it's okay to have different, even within holiness and within our relationship with God, there can be two avenues that both, depending on where we're up to and where we're at, each one can be the priority. And that's really what we're saying, is it's sometimes it's east, sometimes it's west. It can look a little confusing to someone. Okay, say really, if you take any kid in a Jewish school anywhere, 10 years old, 11 years old, and I would assume if you tell them, you say which direction do we face for God, they would say east. Then you tell them the Gemara says, the Talmud says that the divine presence is in the west. You're totally confused. Because it's very hard to reconcile. So that's why, and I assume you'd have that idea, because I at one point in my life I also went through this. So 1 second, I was never in the base of English. I was never in the temple. So I'm thinking east. Now you tell me that it's actually the divine presence is in the west. So why are we doing this? Why are we diving to the east? Why do we pray to the east? So you say there are two different lanes. One is one where the beauty of facing our origins, and the other one is the beauty of facing our divine potential. They're not the same, because in the human world, our origins and our potential are two different things. One's past, one's future, and that's so. The idea of east is more of the past, and the past is beautiful, and the past is our origins, and the past is birth, and the past is God creation. But if you think of it in the scope of why we're alive, it's really about the future. So we connect with our past, with our origins, but then we want to head towards the future.
And that's the reason why we shake west last, and we do it in 2 different motions.
I would say that that's where we're going, yes, because that's ultimately that's where we're headed.
Mhm. This has been really, thank you so much.
My pleasure. So I wish you a wonderful Sukkot. We'll pick this up next week.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Thank
Okay.
you. Bye,
You're
Yolanda.
Bye, Yolanda.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Maybe you all. Bye.